The small house stood at the end of a dusty road where very few people ever stopped. It looked peaceful from the outside, but life inside was very different. Every morning before the sun came up, the orphan was already awake. While the rest of the family slept comfortably, the day's work had already begun. The floors had to be swept, breakfast had to be prepared, water had to be carried, and clothes had to be washed before anyone else even opened their eyes. No one ever said thank you. Instead, every task was followed by another order. If something was not perfect, there were complaints. If everything was done well, nobody noticed. The orphan had slowly become invisible inside the house, treated less like family and more like someone whose only purpose was to work. The neighbors believed the child had been lucky to find a home after losing both parents at such a young age. They had no idea what happened behind the closed door every single day. The smiles shown to visitors disappeared the moment nobody was watching. Kind words became harsh voices, and simple mistakes became excuses for more humiliation. Even during meals, the difference was clear. The family gathered around the table with warm food while the orphan waited quietly in the kitchen. Only after everyone had finished was it finally time to eat whatever little remained. Sometimes the food was cold. Sometimes there was hardly enough. Still, there was never a complaint. School was not much easier. The orphan wore old clothes that had been passed down many times. The shoes had been repaired again and again until they barely stayed together. Some classmates laughed without knowing the real story. Others simply ignored the quiet student who always sat near the back of the classroom. Yet there was something different about the orphan. No matter how difficult life became, kindness never disappeared. If another student dropped books, they were picked up without hesitation. If someone needed help with homework, time was always given. Even after facing unkind words, there was never a desire to hurt anyone in return. The teachers noticed this quiet strength. One of them often wondered how someone carrying so much pain could still show so much patience. The answer remained a mystery. After school, there was never time to play. While other children laughed in the streets or kicked the ball across the field, the orphan hurried home, knowing more work was waiting. Dinner had to be prepared, dishes cleaned, the yard swept, and every room put in order before bedtime. Sometimes, late at night, after everyone else had gone to sleep, the orphan would quietly sit outside under the stars. Those peaceful moments lasted only a few minutes, but they felt like a different world. Looking at the endless sky brought a small feeling of hope. Somewhere beyond the darkness, life had to be better than this. Across the street lived an elderly neighbor who had watched everything for years. Although never invited into the house, the neighbor noticed enough to understand that the child carried far more responsibility than anyone should. Every now and then, a warm smile or a piece of homemade bread was quietly offered. One evening, while the orphan was sweeping the front yard, the elderly neighbor gently said, "Never let people decide your worth. A kind heart is worth more than money, and one day the truth always finds its way." Those simple words stayed in the orphan's mind. No one had ever spoken with such kindness before. It was only a short conversation, but it became something to remember whenever life felt too heavy. Days turned into weeks, and nothing seemed to change. The same hard work, the same cold treatment, and the same lonely routine continued. Still, the orphan refused to give up. Deep inside, there was a quiet belief that life could not stay this way forever. Unknown to everyone in the neighborhood, someone had been watching from a distance. Every few weeks, a dark luxury car quietly stopped near the end of the street. The people inside never stepped out. They simply looked toward the small house for a few moments before driving away again. The orphan never noticed the car. Busy carrying groceries or cleaning the yard, there was no reason to pay attention to passing vehicles. But the elderly neighbor noticed it every single time. The same expensive car, the same careful timing, the same silent departure. One afternoon, after another long day filled with chores and criticism, the orphan stood outside hanging freshly washed clothes under the warm afternoon sun. At that exact moment, the black luxury car appeared once again. This time it did not drive past. Instead, it slowly came to a stop just a short distance from the house. The engine turned off. The front door opened. A sharply dressed stranger stepped out, holding a thick leather folder and looking directly toward the small house, as if searching for someone very important. The stranger closed the car door and calmly walked toward the small house. The expensive suit, polished shoes, and leather folder immediately caught everyone's attention. People working in nearby yards stopped for a moment to watch. It was rare to see someone like that in such a quiet neighborhood. The orphan was still hanging clothes on the line when the stranger stopped a few steps away. "Excuse me," the visitor said politely. "I'm looking for the person who lives here." Before the orphan could answer, one of the relatives rushed outside with a wide smile that never appeared during normal days. "You must have the wrong address," the relative said quickly. "There is nobody important living here." The visitor looked at a document inside the folder, and then calmly looked back at the house. "I believe this is a correct place," the visitor replied. "I am searching for the orphan who has lived here for many years." The smile on the relative's face disappeared almost instantly. The orphan looked surprised. No stranger had ever come asking for them before. That's me," the orphan answered quietly. The visitor nodded with respect, not with pity. "Thank you. I have been trying to find you." The relatives quickly stepped between them. "There must be some mistake," another family member said. "This child owns nothing and has no family left." The visitor did not argue. Instead, the folder was opened, revealing several neatly organized papers. He carefully checked each page before speaking again. "There is no mistake. The information has been confirmed many times." The relatives exchanged nervous looks. For the first time in years, they seemed unsure of themselves. The visitor did not explain everything immediately. Instead, he asked if the orphan would be willing to meet somewhere quiet to discuss important family matters. The orphan hesitated. No one had ever spoken about family matters before. As far as they knew, there was nothing left to discover. The relatives quickly interrupted again. "There is no need for that," one of them said with forced laughter. "The child is very busy helping around the house." The visitor looked directly at them. "I believe this decision belongs to the orphan." Those simple words filled the air with silence. For the first time, someone had asked what the orphan wanted instead of giving another order. After a few moments, the orphan nodded. "I'll listen." The visitor smiled kindly. "Good. I only asked for 1 hour of your time." The relatives suddenly became much friendlier than usual. They offered water to the guests and even spoke kindly to the orphan, something they had not done in years. Their sudden change felt strange. The elderly neighbor watched everything from across the street. Deep inside, there was a feeling that something important was finally beginning. The visitor invited the orphan into the waiting car. Sitting inside felt completely different from anything ever experienced before. The seats were soft, the air was cool, and the ride was quiet. As they drove through the city, the orphan looked out the window, wondering where they were going. Nearly an hour later, the car stopped in front of a tall office building made of shining glass. People in business suits walked in and out while security guards politely greeted arriving visitors. The orphan looked at the building with surprise. "I've never been anywhere like this," they admitted. "You deserve to be here," the visitor answered gently. Inside, everything looked elegant. Bright lights reflected from polished floors. Beautiful paintings decorated the walls. Employees greeted the visitor with respect before quietly looking at the orphan with curiosity. No one laughed at the old clothes. No one judged worn shoes. Instead, everyone treated the orphan with unexpected kindness. The visitor led the way into a large meeting room overlooking the city. Several older professionals were already waiting. As soon as the orphan entered, every person stood up. The orphan looked around, confused. "Why are they standing?" they whispered. "They are showing respect," the visitor replied. Respect. It was a feeling the orphan had almost forgotten existed. After everyone sat down, a small wooden box was carefully placed on the table. The visitor slowly opened it. Inside rested several old photographs, official documents, and a beautifully crafted silver pendant. The orphan immediately recognized the pendant. It looked exactly like the one their mother used to wear before she passed away. Hands began to shake. "How? How do you have this?" the orphan asked softly. The visitor took a slow breath. "Because your parents trusted us to protect it until the right day came." The room became completely silent. For years, everyone had believed the orphan's family story had ended. But according to the documents resting on the table, it had only just begun. The visitor carefully slid one sealed envelope across the table. "This letter was written many years ago," he said quietly. "It was meant to be opened only when we finally found you." The orphan stared at the envelope without touching it. The handwriting on the front looked strangely familiar. It was the same handwriting that appeared in an old birthday card kept safely among the few precious memories from childhood. With trembling hands, the orphan slowly reached for the envelope, knowing that whatever was written inside was about to change everything forever. The orphan carefully opened the old envelope. The paper inside had turned slightly yellow with age, but the writing was still clear. The first few words brought tears almost instantly. "My dear child, if you are reading this, it means the day we hope for has finally arrived." The orphan paused for a moment, trying to hold back emotions. It had been many years since seeing anything written by a parent. Every word felt warm, as if love had reached across time. The letter explained that the parents had always wanted their child to grow up safely. Before their passing, they had trusted a group of legal advisors to protect important family records until the right time. They believed that one day the truth would finally come to light. After the letter was read, one of the senior advisors gently placed several official documents on the table. "We know this may be difficult to believe," he said kindly, "but everything here has been carefully verified." The orphan looked through the papers one by one. There were family records, old photographs, business documents, and legal certificates. Every page connected to the next, telling a story that had been hidden for years. One photograph showed smiling parents standing in front of a large estate. Another showed a much younger child being held in loving arms. Although the memories were faint, the faces felt familiar. The advisor continued speaking. "Your grandparents built one of the country's most respected business groups many years ago. They worked with honesty, treated employees fairly, and believed that success should help others. Their dream was to pass everything down through the family." The orphan listened quietly. "After a series of unexpected family events, your parents chose to keep your identity private. They feared that attention and public pressure could place you in danger while you were still very young. For your protection, trusted legal professionals managed the family estate until you became an adult." The room fell silent again. Everything that once seemed impossible was slowly becoming real. The visitor who had found the orphan smiled gently. "We have spent years searching for the right documents and confirming every detail. We wanted to be completely certain before meeting you." The orphan looked down at the papers once more. "So, this is really my family?" "Yes," the advisor replied. "And according to the legal trust, you are the rightful successor to the billionaire dynasty your grandparents created." For a long moment, there were no words. The orphan had spent years worrying about tomorrow's meals, repairing old shoes, and wondering if life would ever become easier. Now, people were speaking about companies, family history, and responsibilities that seemed impossible to imagine. "I don't know anything about running a business," the orphan admitted honestly. The advisor smiled. "No one expects you to know everything today. Leadership can be taught. Kindness, honesty, and humility cannot. Those are already part of who you are." Those words brought comfort. One of the advisors pressed a button, and a large screen lit up. Images of office buildings, factories, research centers, and community projects appeared. "Our organization employs thousands of people," he explained. "Many families depend on these businesses. We are not only protecting wealth, we are protecting jobs, dreams, and opportunities." The orphan realized this was about much more than money. It was about people. The meeting continued for hours. Financial experts explained how the trust had been managed responsibly for many years. Lawyers described every legal step with patience, answering every question clearly. Nothing felt rushed. Everyone wanted the orphan to understand the truth completely. Meanwhile, news of the meeting quietly reached the relatives back home. At first, they refused to believe it. "There's no way," one of them insisted. But later that evening, several local newspapers and online business reports mentioned that the long-awaited successor to a respected business family had finally been located. The relatives read every article in disbelief. Slowly, the reality began to sink in. The child they had treated like a servant was no ordinary orphan. Back at the office, the visitor handed over a small wooden box. "This belonged to your parents," he said. Inside were simple personal belongings, a family photograph, a handwritten notebook filled with encouraging messages, and the silver pendant that had rested on the meeting table earlier. The orphan gently held the pendant. For the first time in many years, there was a feeling of being connected to the past instead of separated from it. The parents had never truly disappeared. Their love had been waiting inside these memories all along. As the meeting came to an end, the chairman stood and smiled warmly. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will introduce you to the people who have been protecting your family's legacy. They have waited many years for this moment." The orphan looked out through the large window at the city below. Life had changed in just one day, but deep inside, one promise quietly formed. No matter how much the future changed, kindness would never be left behind. That promise would soon become the foundation of an entirely new chapter, one that would surprise not only the business world but everyone who had ever underestimated the quiet orphan. The next morning felt completely different from every morning the orphan had ever known. Instead of waking before sunrise to clean floors and prepare breakfast for others, the day began with a quiet breakfast shared with people who spoke with kindness and respect. It was still hard to believe that everything happening was real. After breakfast, the advisors introduced the orphan to the leaders of the family business. They came from different departments, but they all had one thing in common. They had worked for the company for many years and had remained loyal to the family through every challenge. One by one, they welcomed the orphan with warm smiles and kind words. "We've waited a long time to meet you," one executive said. "We're here to help," another added. The orphan thanked each person with honesty. There was no pride or arrogance, only gratitude. The first few weeks were filled with learning. Every day brought something new. The orphan learned how businesses were managed, how important decisions were made, and how every choice could affect thousands of employees and their families. The lessons were not always easy, but the orphan never complained. The same determination that had once helped survive difficult days now became the greatest strength in this new life. Whenever something was confusing, questions were asked without fear. The advisors appreciated this humble attitude. "You don't pretend to know everything," one advisor said. "That is a sign of someone who can become a great leader." The orphan smiled. "I've spent my whole life learning. I don't want to stop now." Outside the company, news about the newly discovered Successor spread quickly. Television programs, newspapers, and business magazines shared the incredible story of the orphan whose true identity had remained hidden for years. People across the country were touched by the story. Many admired the strength it had taken to survive such a difficult childhood without losing kindness. Back in the neighborhood, the relatives watched every report with growing regret. Every interview reminded them of the way they had treated the orphan. Neighbors who had once remained silent now quietly questioned why the child had always been working while everyone else rested. The relatives realized that money had not changed the orphan. It had only revealed the truth that had always been there. Several weeks later, the orphan decided to visit the old neighborhood. The expensive car stopped in front of the same small house where so many painful memories had been made. People slowly gathered outside, curious to see what would happen. The relatives stepped outside with nervous expressions. For a few moments, nobody spoke. Finally, one of them lowered their head. "We treated you unfairly," the relative admitted quietly. "We cannot change the past, but we are truly sorry." The orphan listened without anger. The painful memories had not disappeared, but holding on to bitterness would not change anything. "I accept your apology," the orphan replied calmly. "Everyone deserved the chance to become better. But forgiveness does not mean pretending nothing happened." The relatives nodded with tears in their eyes. They understood. Some trust takes time to rebuild. Before leaving, the orphan walked across the street to visit the elderly neighbor. The older person smiled warmly. "I knew this day would come," the neighbor said. The orphan laughed softly. "You believed in me before anyone else did." The neighbor gently replied, "No, I simply saw the goodness that was already inside you." Those words meant more than any business award ever could. A few months later, the orphan announced the first major decision as the family's new successor. Instead of buying something luxurious, a large scholarship program was created for children who had lost their parents or could not afford a good education. Schools received new books. Community centers received funding. Young people were given opportunities that many had once believed impossible. Employees throughout the company were proud. "This is exactly what the family always believed in," one longtime manager said. Soon after, healthcare programs and food support projects were also launched in communities that needed help the most. People noticed that the new leader spent more time listening than speaking. Instead of giving orders from a large office, the orphan often visited employees, asked about their families, and thanked them for their hard work. The company culture slowly became even stronger. Workers felt respected. Productivity improved. Customers trusted the business even more. One afternoon, during a company gathering, thousands of employees filled a large hall. The chairman stepped onto the stage. "It is now my honor," he announced, "to officially introduce a person who will lead this family legacy into the future." The audience stood and applauded as the orphan walked forward. Looking across the room, memories of the small house, endless chores, lonely nights, and quiet tears came rushing back. Taking a slow breath, the orphan smiled. "I know what it feels like to be overlooked." The speech began. "That is why I promise every person here that you will always be treated with dignity and respect. A successful company is not built only by buildings or money. It is built by people who care for one another." The hall became completely silent. Many employees wiped away tears. They realized they were not simply welcoming a new business leader. They were welcoming someone who truly understood the value of compassion, because it had once been the one thing missing from their own life. Several years passed, and the company continued to grow under its new leader. The success did not come from making quick decisions or chasing money alone. It came from treating people with fairness, honesty, and respect. Employees felt valued, customers trusted the company, and communities welcomed every new project with hope. The orphan never forgot where life had started. Even after moving into a beautiful home, there were reminders of the past everywhere. The old silver pendant stayed on the desk every day. The handwritten letter from the parents was carefully protected. Whenever life became busy or difficult, those memories reminded the orphan why kindness should always come before power. The scholarship program continued to expand each year. Thousands of children who had lost their parents received a chance to study without worrying about school fees. Some became teachers, doctors, engineers, and business owners. Many of them later returned to thank the person who had given them an opportunity when no one else believed in them. The healthcare projects also grew. Small clinics were built in places where families had once traveled long distances for basic treatment. Clean water systems were installed in villages that had struggled for years. Community centers opened their doors to young people who needed safe places to learn and grow. People began saying that the family's greatest investment was not in buildings or businesses. It was in people. Inside the company, every employee knew they could speak honestly without fear. Suggestions were welcomed. Hard work was rewarded fairly. Managers were encouraged to listen before making decisions. The atmosphere was completely different from many other large companies. Visitors often asked the same question: what is the secret behind this success? The answer was always simple. When people are treated with respect, they give their best. One afternoon, the orphan received a letter from the elderly neighbor who had always offered words of encouragement during the hardest days. The letter thanked the orphan for never allowing success to change a kind heart. It ended with one sentence that brought back many memories. "I always knew your future would be brighter than your past." The orphan smiled and decided to visit the old neighborhood once again. This time, everything felt different. The dusty road was still there, but many of the nearby homes had been repaired through community projects supported by the family foundation. Children played safely outside after school. Trees lined the streets, and small gardens added color where empty spaces had once been. The elderly neighbor was waiting outside with the same warm smile. "I've been hoping you would visit," the older person said. The orphan gently thanked the neighbor for believing in someone who had once felt completely alone. "If you had not spoken those kind words years ago," the orphan admitted, "I might have stopped believing in myself." The neighbor smiled. Sometimes people don't need money. Sometimes they simply need one person to remind them that they matter. Those words stayed